So Warren, what specifically would you do to restore financial stability in Pennsylvania?
I think one of the things we really need to focus on are the pensions. I think that the pension essentially crisis that's coming in the next couple of years, I don't know if folks know about it, but benefits were increased in, I don't know, 2001 to the point where we're going to get like a 30% hit. Probably each of us in a school district might have to pay an extra $500 in 2012 over and above whatever increases there are for just regular costs, that sort of thing. I think you have to go after the pensions. You can't change the ones that already exist and are already being received by retirees, but the private sector, my own law firm as well, we had to change from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan like a 401k. It's not as nice for everybody, but we just can't afford that bill over and over again. We just can't.
So the state constitution requires a balanced budget. What would you do to comply with this, and how would you go about doing it?
Well, I mean, one thing is to maybe stand up in the legislature and say, guys, the deadline is coming, it's time to get something done. I mean, you know, we have a balanced budget and a law in Tredyffrin Township, and granted, there are only 7 of us, but we comply with it. We comply with it year in and year out. I think that people have to start saying that in the legislature. If that doesn't work, I've heard of people talking about penalties, like you don't get paid if you don't pass the budget. Okay, I'm okay with that.
So a little bit about the role of government then. What's the 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution? What does it signify to you?
So the 10th Amendment is the one that says that all the powers that are not given to the federal government are reserved to the states.
Correct.
Okay, all right.
And to the people.
And to the people. I mean, I do think that the whole notion of federalism is something that has done this country very well for a couple of hundred years. And wherever we can reinvigorate it or give it some new life, we ought to do that. I mean, the states were designed and the localities were designed for actually experimenting and figuring out how to do things better. When you get to that sort of big federal government deciding everything, well, look where we are right now. I believe in local control, and I think the 10th Amendment is the Constitution speaking to local control.
Do you believe it's been violated, the 10th Amendment? If so, how?
You see, now you're getting me as a lawyer. I'm sorry. I mean, you know, unfortunately, the Supreme Court of the United States for the last probably 70 years has gutted the 10th Amendment. So until the Supreme Court starts taking back the 10th Amendment, I don't know that there's much for us to do about it. But
No.
well, okay, all right.
About Congress. Why are you afraid to say yes or no? Everybody who gets at that, they're afraid to say yes or no. It is what it is.
It's a federal issue.
It is what it is. Now, you can be born in this country, but it doesn't mean you're an American. That Constitution is for Americans. It is what it is. You are what you are.
Thank you. Well, yes or no, I guess, has it been violated? I mean, we also have the Commerce Clause, which dictates interstate commerce and has bearing on the 10th Amendment. And I guess that's the argument for some of the larger federal government that we have. Not to go words.
Well,
I'm not running.
I mean, I think totally the Commerce Clause has been abused. I mean, it is the great hole in the Constitution through which all of these gigantic federal programs have been run. And I think that the Supreme Court ought to take it back. I agree with that.
Legislators take it back. You represent us.
Yeah.
We want it back.
All powers in the people. You need to represent us. You're attorney first.
Well, would you be, related to that then, would you be in favor of a bipartisan resolution for Pennsylvania's sovereignty under the 10th Amendment, like some other states have done?
A bipartisan resolution in favor of the 10th Amendment.
I didn't write these questions.
Well, okay. Certainly I would. In the state legislature, I would vote for such a thing because I think that the state, the counties, the localities, that's the place where the people are best represented and not in DC.
Okay. One or two more questions and then we're going to take a break. So do you think our tax system is fair and equitable to the tax-paying citizens?
No, I don't. I mean, I think something like a flat tax is what we ought to do. I think that, you know, if you earn $1 and there's a tax rate on it, it ought to be there no matter what dollar it is that you've earned.
What would you do to improve it as it is now? Would you?
Well, in this, let's just talk about the state system. The state has a flat tax for income, but we tax on top of that corporate income at 10% on top of what is paid to the federal government, both in corporate tax and in federal income tax. So that's really 4 taxes on the same dollar for anybody who owns a business. I think that ought to change. I think that 10% ought to come down. I think that the stock and franchise tax, which is on top of that, ought to come down. I think we ought to start there because, as I said before, I think small business is what gets countries out of economic downturns. It's what creates the first jobs. And if it can't get out from under, then how are we ever going to get out from under as a country?
Do you think, do you believe that a state sales or consumption tax could replace a school or property tax? Why not?
I think that, it was a sales tax and a consumption tax?
Sales, consumption tax to replace school properties.
You know what, I think a formula like that makes some sense. The 2 criteria for property tax reform that I would insist on are that local municipalities, school districts, counties retain control over the money. Because if the money goes to Harrisburg, who knows where it's going after that? And I also would insist on, if there is any way to do it, that if you're actually going to promise property tax reform by shifting to some other tax, that both taxes don't suddenly start rising again. Yeah. Because that's what's happened with this casino property tax reform. I mean, I guess some people have gotten homestead rebates or whatever, but the taxes keep going up, both of them.
Well, that's the last question we're going to have time for. So do you believe gambling and lottery revenues are truly financing senior programs, or is the budget becoming overly dependent on it?
You know, I looked on the Commonwealth Foundation website again today, and apparently the auditor, Wagner, I think, Jack Wagner, the Pennsylvania auditor, figured out that the Rendell administration was actually overstating property tax relief from the casinos by about 20%, something like $600 million. And that the average benefit that Pennsylvanians have got is about $189. And yet it's like $3 billion that this new tax has taken in already. So the math doesn't add up in my mind, and I think somebody needs to look into that.
All right, that's all we're going to have time for.